The bitter wind cut through the Alaskan wilderness like a knife, carrying snow that stung exposed skin and made visibility nearly impossible. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera pulled his jacket tighter around his chest as he trudged through the knee-deep powder, his German shepherd, Rex, moving steadily beside him. The dog's thick coat was better suited for this harsh environment than Marcus's military-issued gear. But both had endured worse conditions during their 3 tours together in Afghanistan. Marcus had come to Alaska seeking solitude after his discharge 6 months ago. The nightmares, the flashbacks, the constant feeling of being on edge. Civilian life hadn't been the peaceful transition everyone promised it would be. His therapist at the VA hospital suggested he try something different, maybe somewhere quiet where he could process everything he'd been through. Alaska seemed like the perfect place to disappear for a while. He'd rented a small cabin 30 miles outside of Anchorage, planning to spend the winter months hunting, fishing, and trying to figure out what came next in his life. Rex had been his constant companion throughout it all. The dog understood him in ways that people couldn't. When the panic attacks hit in the middle of the night, Rex would press his warm body against Marcus's side until the trembling stopped. When the anger bubbled up unexpectedly, Rex would nudge his hand with a cold nose, grounding him back to the present moment. Today was supposed to be a simple supply run to the nearest town about 15 miles away. Marcus had loaded his backpack with essentials, ammunition, medical supplies, and tools he might need for repairs around the cabin. The weather forecast had called for light snow, nothing too serious for someone with his experience. But Alaska weather could change in minutes, and what started as a gentle snowfall had quickly turned into a full blizzard. Rex suddenly stopped walking and raised his head, his ears perked forward in alert mode. Marcus immediately went still, his hand instinctively moving toward the knife on his belt. Years of combat had taught him to trust his dog's instincts completely. If Rex sensed something, there was definitely something there. The dog began moving toward a cluster of pine trees about 50 yards to their left, his tail lowered and his body tense. Marcus followed, trying to peer through the swirling snow. As they got closer, he could make out what looked like a dark shape against the white backdrop of snow-covered branches. It was a person, and they weren't moving. Marcus's training kicked in immediately. He rushed forward, Rex right beside him, and found a woman lying face down in the snow. She was wearing jeans and a light jacket, completely inappropriate clothing for this kind of weather. Her long dark hair was partially covered with snow, and her lips had a dangerous blue tint that Marcus recognized as the early stages of hypothermia. He quickly checked for a pulse at her neck, and felt relief when he found one, though it was weak and slow. Her breathing was shallow, but she was alive. Marcus knew he had maybe 30 minutes before her condition became critical. He needed to get her warm and conscious as quickly as possible. Working efficiently, Marcus cleared the snow away from around her body and carefully turned her over. She appeared to be in her early 30s with delicate features that were now pale and drawn from the cold. There were no obvious injuries that he could see, but her clothes were soaked through from lying in the snow. Marcus pulled out his emergency blanket from his backpack and wrapped it around the woman's body. He then gathered her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt. Rex stayed close as Marcus began carrying her back toward the direction of his cabin. The storm was getting worse, and he knew they needed shelter immediately. The walk back felt like it took hours, though Marcus knew it had only been about 20 minutes. His arms ached from carrying the unconscious woman, and the wind seemed to be fighting against every step he took. Rex bounded ahead through the snow, occasionally looking back to make sure his human was still following. When they finally reached the cabin, Marcus kicked the door open and carried the woman straight to the fireplace. He had banked the coals before leaving that morning, and it only took a few minutes to get a strong fire going again. The warmth felt incredible after being out in the storm. Marcus laid the woman on the thick rug in front of the fire and began working to get her out of her wet clothes. This was purely medical. He'd done this kind of emergency treatment many times during his military service. Hypothermia could be deadly if not treated quickly and properly. He wrapped her in dry blankets and began gently rubbing her arms and legs to encourage blood circulation. Rex sat nearby, watching intently as if he understood the seriousness of the situation. The dog had seen Marcus help injured soldiers before and seemed to know his role was to stay quiet and alert. After about 10 minutes of warming treatment, the woman began to stir slightly. Her eyelids fluttered and she made a small sound. Marcus continued his gentle, warming massage while speaking to her in a calm, reassuring voice. "Hey there, you're safe now. You're in a warm place. Can you hear me?" he said softly. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually becoming more aware of her surroundings. She looked up at Marcus with confusion and fear, which was a normal response for someone coming out of hypothermia. People often didn't remember how they'd gotten into danger. "It's okay," Marcus continued in the same gentle tone he'd used to calm frightened civilians overseas. "My name is Marcus. This is Rex. We found you in the snow and brought you somewhere safe. You're going to be fine." The woman tried to sit up but was still too weak. Marcus helped her into a more comfortable position, keeping the blankets wrapped securely around her. Color was starting to return to her face, which was an encouraging sign. Where am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from the cold. "You're at my cabin about 15 miles outside of town. Do you remember what happened? How you ended up out in the storm?" She closed her eyes and seemed to be trying to piece together her memories. Marcus could see the effort it was taking for her to think clearly. Hypothermia often caused confusion and memory problems. I was running," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "Someone was chasing me." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. This woman hadn't just gotten lost in the storm. She had been in real danger, and that danger might still be out there somewhere. Marcus sat back on his heels, studying the woman's face carefully. Her words echoed in the small cabin. Someone was chasing me. In his years of military service, he'd learned to read people quickly and accurately. The fear in her eyes wasn't the confused disorientation of hypothermia. This was something deeper, more immediate. "What's your name?" he asked gently, keeping his voice calm despite the alarm bells going off in his head. "Sarah," she whispered, pulling the blankets tighter around herself. "Sarah Chen." "Okay, Sarah, you're safe here."
"Can you tell me who was chasing you?"
She shook her head quickly, almost frantically. "You don't understand. He'll find me. He always finds me." Her breathing started to become rapid and shallow, not from the cold anymore, but from panic. Marcus recognized the signs immediately. He'd seen them in his own mirror too many times. This woman was dealing with trauma, and pushing her for details right now would only make things worse. "Sarah, look at me," he said firmly but kindly. "Nobody is going to hurt you here. Do you see Rex?" He gestured toward his dog, who had moved closer and was now lying down near the fireplace, his intelligent eyes watching Sarah with calm attention. "Rex is trained to detect people from over a mile away. If anyone was following you, he would know. His ears are much better than ours." Sarah looked at the German Shepherd, and some of the panic seemed to leave her eyes. Rex had that effect on people. There was something deeply reassuring about his steady, protective presence. "He's beautiful," she said softly. "He's also very smart. We served together overseas for 3 years. He saved my life more times than I can count." Marcus stood up and moved to the kitchen area of the small cabin. "You need something warm to drink." "Hot chocolate, okay?" Sarah nodded, and Marcus busied himself preparing the drink. While the milk heated on the stove, he thought about the situation. A woman running through a blizzard in inadequate clothing, talking about someone chasing her. This wasn't a case of someone getting lost while hiking. This was someone fleeing from danger. He brought the steaming mug over to Sarah, who accepted it gratefully with shaking hands. The warmth seemed to help her regain some strength, and she was able to sit up more easily. "How long was I out there?" she asked. "I'm not sure. When we found you, your core temperature was dangerously low. You'd been unconscious for a while." Marcus settled into the chair across from her. "Sarah, I need to ask you something important. Do you need medical attention beyond warming up? Are you hurt anywhere?" She seemed to consider this carefully. "No, I don't think so. Just cold and tired." "What about the police? Should we call them?" The reaction was immediate and strong. Sarah's eyes widened with fear, and she nearly dropped the mug. "No, please, no police. You can't call anyone." Marcus held up his hands in a calming gesture. Okay, no police. But Sarah, if someone is trying to hurt you, there are people who can help." "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "He is the police." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. During his tours overseas, he'd seen what happened when the people who were supposed to protect citizens became the threat instead. It was one of the most difficult situations to handle because the normal channels for help weren't available. Tell me what happened, Marcus said quietly. Sarah took a shaky sip of hot chocolate, and Rex moved closer to her, resting his big head near her feet. She reached down absently to pet him, and the simple action seemed to calm her nerves. His name is Detective Ray Morrison. We dated for about 6 months. At first he was wonderful. Charming, protective, everything I thought I wanted. Her voice became stronger as she talked, as if sharing the story was helping her process it. But then things started to change. He became possessive, jealous. He wanted to know where I was every minute of every day. Marcus nodded, encouraging her to continue without interrupting. He'd seen this pattern before. Relationships that started well but gradually became prisons. When I tried to break up with him 3 months ago, he wouldn't accept it. He said he loved me too much to let me go. He started showing up at my work, my apartment, anywhere I went. He used his police resources to track me. Sarah's hands were trembling now, but not from the cold. He would pull me over when I was driving, using his badge as an excuse. He installed tracking software on my phone. He convinced my friends and family that I was having some kind of breakdown, that he was just trying to help me. "Where are you from?" Marcus asked. "Fairbanks. I work as a nurse at the hospital there." "Worked, I guess. I haven't been to my job in 2 weeks because I was afraid he'd find me there." Marcus did a quick mental calculation. Fairbanks was about 350 miles north of where they were now. That was a long way to run in winter conditions, especially on foot. "How did you get all the way down here?" "I stole a car," Sarah said simply. 2 days ago I saw my chance and I took it. I drove as far as I could before it ran out of gas about 20 miles from here. Then I started walking. The pieces were starting to come together for Marcus. A desperate woman fleeing an abusive situation, stealing a car, walking through dangerous conditions because she felt she had no other choice. It took incredible courage to do what she had done. "Sarah, you said he was chasing you when we found you. Do you think he tracked you here?" She nodded miserably. "He called me this morning. Somehow he knew exactly where I was. He said he was coming to get me, and that this time I wouldn't be able to run away again. I panicked and ran into the woods. I thought maybe I could hide until he gave up and went away." Marcus stood up and walked to the window, peering out through the storm. The snow was still falling heavily and visibility was almost zero. That was actually good news. It would make it much harder for anyone to track them. "Sarah, I want you to know that you did the right thing by running. What he's doing to you isn't love, and it isn't legal, badge or no badge." Marcus turned back to face her. "But running into a blizzard nearly killed you. We need to come up with a better plan." "What kind of plan?" she asked, hope creeping into her voice for the first time since she'd woken up. Marcus looked at Rex, who seemed to understand that something serious was being discussed. The dog sat up straighter, alert and ready. "First, we keep you alive and safe. Second, we figure out how to get you somewhere he can't find you. And third, we make sure he can't do this to anyone else." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking about his answer, because sometimes good people find themselves in impossible situations, and they need someone to stand with them. Rex and I were pretty good at handling impossible situations. The storm continued to rage outside the cabin as Marcus began to formulate a plan. Years of military tactical training had taught him to assess situations quickly and think several steps ahead. Right now, they had some advantages. The weather was providing natural cover. They were in a remote location that would be difficult to find, and Rex would give them early warning if anyone approached. But they also had significant challenges. Sarah was still recovering from her exposure to the cold. They had limited supplies, and they were dealing with someone who had law enforcement training and resources. "Sarah, I need you to tell me everything you can about this Detective Morrison. What kind of vehicle does he drive? What weapons does he carry? Does he work alone or with partners?" She wrapped the blanket more tightly around herself and thought carefully. "He drives a black pickup truck, personal vehicle, not a police car. He always carries his service weapon, and he has hunting rifles at home. As for partners," she paused, looking worried. "He has friends on the force, but I don't know how much they know about what he's been doing to me." Marcus nodded. "What about his tracking methods? You said he found you somehow. He's obsessed with technology. He put tracking apps on my phone, my car, even hid a GPS device in my purse once. I threw away my phone and left my purse when I stole the car, but..." She looked up at Marcus with frightened eyes. "He's smart, really smart, and he knows I don't have anywhere else to go. What do you mean? My parents live in Seattle, but they think I'm the problem. Ray convinced them that I was unstable, that he was trying to help me get treatment. My closest friends all think I'm paranoid. He's very good at making himself look like the reasonable one. Marcus felt a familiar anger building in his chest, the same feeling he'd had when encountering bullies and abusers during his military service. People who used their power to hurt those who couldn't fight back were the worst kind of enemy. Sarah, has he ever physically hurt you? She was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see her debating how much to reveal. Finally, she pushed up the sleeve of the shirt he'd given her to wear, revealing several faded bruises on her forearm. He grabbed me pretty hard the last time I tried to leave, said it was because he was afraid I'd hurt myself. Her voice was bitter. Everything he does, he has an excuse for. He's never hit me with his fist or anything obvious like that. He's too careful. Marcus examined the bruises with a practiced eye. They were consistent with someone grabbing her arm forcefully, probably hard enough to leave marks for weeks. In his experience, people who left bruises like these were often just getting started with physical violence. Rex suddenly lifted his head and growled low in his throat. Marcus immediately went still, listening carefully. The dog's ears were perked forward, and he was staring toward the door of the cabin. "What is it, boy?" Marcus whispered. Rex stood up and moved toward the window, his body tense and alert. Marcus motioned for Sarah to stay quiet and grabbed his rifle from where it was leaning against the wall. He moved carefully to the window and peered out through a small gap in the curtains. The storm was still heavy, but through the swirling snow, Marcus could make out a dark shape moving slowly through the trees about 200 yards away. It looked like someone on foot moving deliberately toward the cabin. "Is there a back door?" Sarah whispered, her face pale with terror. "Yes, but we're not running." Marcus moved away from the window and began checking his rifle. "You nearly died out there once today. I'm not letting you go back into that storm. But if it's him, then we deal with it." Marcus's voice was calm and steady. "Sarah, I need you to go into the bedroom and stay low. Take Rex with you." "I'm not leaving you alone." "Rex isn't leaving me alone. He's staying with you to keep you safe. That's his job now." Marcus looked at his dog, who seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation. "Rex, guard." The German shepherd immediately moved to Sarah's side and gently nudged her toward the bedroom. He would stay with her now until Marcus gave him a different command. Marcus checked his other weapons and equipment, his movements efficient and practiced. If Detective Morrison had somehow tracked them here, Marcus needed to be ready for any kind of confrontation. But he also needed to be smart about it. Killing a police officer, even an abusive one, would create problems that could follow him for the rest of his life. He moved back to the window and watched the figure approaching through the storm. The person was definitely struggling against the weather, moving slowly and carefully. As they got closer, Marcus could see it was a man wearing winter gear and carrying what looked like a rifle. The man stopped about 50 yards from the cabin and appeared to be studying it. Marcus could see him looking at the windows, probably trying to determine if anyone was inside. The smoke coming from the chimney was a dead giveaway that the cabin was occupied. Marcus made a quick decision. Rather than wait for the man to come to the door, he would go out and confront him away from the cabin. That would keep Sarah safer and give Marcus more room to maneuver if things went badly. He put on his winter coat and boots, grabbed his rifle, and quietly opened the front door. The wind immediately hit him with brutal force, but he pushed through it and stepped outside onto the covered porch. "That's far enough," he called out in his command voice, the tone he'd used to stop enemy combatants in their tracks. "State your business." The figure stopped immediately and raised his hand slightly, showing that his rifle was pointed down. "I'm looking for someone," the man called back. "A woman. She's mentally ill and dangerous to herself." Marcus felt his jaw clench. Even now, faced with an armed stranger in a blizzard, Morrison was sticking to his cover story about Sarah being unstable. "I haven't seen anyone," Marcus replied. "This is private property." "You need to leave!" The man started moving closer, and Marcus could see his face more clearly now. He was in his 40s with dark hair and a confident bearing that spoke of someone used to being in authority. Even in the storm, he moved like someone who expected others to do what he said. "Look, I'm a police officer," Morrison called out, pulling out what looked like a badge. "The woman I'm looking for stole a car and has been missing for 2 days. Her family is worried sick about her." "I said I haven't seen anyone," Marcus repeated, "and I said you need to leave." "This storm is dangerous. You should head back to town. Morrison was now close enough that Marcus could see his expression clearly. There was something cold and calculating in his eyes that had nothing to do with protecting a mentally ill woman. This was a predator who had tracked his prey and wasn't planning to leave empty-handed. I'm going to need to search your cabin, Morrison said, his voice becoming more authoritative. For her own safety. No, you're not. Marcus raised his rifle slightly, not pointing it directly at Morrison, but making sure the other man could see it clearly. You don't have a warrant, and this isn't your jurisdiction. Move along. Morrison's mask slipped for just a moment, and Marcus saw the real man underneath. The rage, the sense of entitlement, the fury at being told no. It was the look of someone who was used to getting his way through intimidation and wasn't prepared for resistance. You don't want to make an enemy of me, friend, Morrison said, his voice taking on a threatening tone. I have a lot of friends in law enforcement. Making trouble for me would be making trouble for yourself. Marcus almost smiled. After 3 tours in Afghanistan, facing down Taliban fighters and improvised explosive devices, he wasn't particularly impressed by threats from a small-town detective with control issues. I've made a lot of enemies over the years, Marcus replied calmly. What's one more? That's when Morrison made his first real mistake. He assumed that because Marcus was alone and outnumbered, he would back down. He started to raise his rifle. Marcus was faster. Marcus had his rifle pointed directly at Morrison's chest, before the detective had even finished raising his weapon. Years of combat training and lightning-fast reflexes had served him well in countless dangerous situations, and they served him now. Drop it, Marcus commanded, his voice deadly serious. Drop the weapon now. Morrison froze, his rifle halfway to firing position. For the first time since he'd arrived, uncertainty flickered across his face. He was used to intimidating people who were afraid of him, people who had no training or experience with violence. Marcus was clearly different. You're making a big mistake, Morrison said, but his voice lacked the confidence it had held moments before. The only mistake would be you not dropping that rifle in the next 3 seconds, Marcus replied. 1. Morrison's eyes darted around looking for options. The storm was still raging around them, and the visibility was so poor that even if he had backup nearby, they wouldn't be able to help him. 2. The detective slowly lowered his rifle and set it down in the snow. Marcus could see the calculation in his eyes. This wasn't over, just postponed. Morrison was the type of person who would retreat when faced with superior force, but he would be planning his next move. Kick it away from you, Marcus instructed. Morrison complied, sending his rifle sliding several feet away through the snow. Marcus kept his own weapon trained on the man while he considered his options. He couldn't just shoot an unarmed police officer, even one who was clearly dangerous. But he also couldn't just let Morrison walk away to regroup and return with reinforcements. Now we're going to have a conversation, Marcus said. About Sarah Chen. Morrison's face immediately hardened at the mention of Sarah's name. I don't know what she's told you, but that woman is seriously disturbed. She has paranoid delusions, and she's convinced herself that I'm some kind of threat to her. Funny thing about that, Marcus replied. I've spent a lot of time around people with PTSD and trauma. Sarah doesn't act like someone who's delusional. She acts like someone who's been terrorized. You don't understand the situation. I understand it perfectly. Marcus's voice cut through Morrison's protests like ice. You're a cop who's been using his badge to stalk and abuse a woman who tried to leave you. You tracked her across hundreds of miles, and now you're willing to threaten an armed stranger to get to her. Morrison's mask was completely gone now, replaced by cold fury. She belongs to me. I've invested too much in that relationship to let her throw it away because she's confused. The words sent a chill through Marcus that had nothing to do with the weather. Morrison wasn't even pretending to be concerned about Sarah's well-being anymore. He was talking about her like she was property. She doesn't belong to anyone, Marcus said firmly, and she's not going anywhere with you. You think you can protect her? Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. I know who you are now, Marcus Rivera, Staff Sergeant, discharged 6 months ago after 3 tours in Afghanistan. You're renting the Harrison cabin under a 6-month lease. Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Morrison had done his homework quickly and thoroughly. That meant he had accessed law enforcement databases and probably had more resources at his disposal than Marcus had initially realized. I know about your PTSD diagnosis too, Morrison continued, his confidence returning now that he thought he had leverage. How do you think it's going to look when I tell people that a disturbed veteran with anger issues threatened a police officer who was just trying to help a missing person? It's going to look like a dirty cop got caught stalking his ex-girlfriend, Marcus replied. But Morrison's words had hit their mark. The detective was right. In a he-said situation between a police officer and a veteran with PTSD, most people would believe the cop. Here's what's going to happen, Morrison said, taking a step closer. You're going to let me search that cabin for Sarah. When I find her, she's coming with me. And if you interfere, I'll make sure you end up in prison or a psychiatric facility. Marcus was about to respond when he heard a sound that made his blood freeze, the cabin door opening behind him. Don't listen to him, Marcus. Sarah's voice was shaky but determined. He's lying about everything. Marcus didn't turn around, keeping his rifle trained on Morrison, but he could hear Sarah walking across the porch toward them. Rex was with her. Marcus could hear the dog's claws clicking on the wooden planks. Sarah, get back inside, Marcus said urgently. No. Her voice was stronger now. I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of letting him control my life. Morrison's expression changed completely when he saw Sarah. The cold calculation was replaced by something much more dangerous, obsession mixed with, "Right, there's my girl," he said, his voice taking on an unnaturally gentle tone that was somehow more frightening than his threats had been. I've been so worried about you, baby. When you disappeared, I thought I might lose my mind. You already lost your mind, Sarah replied. Months ago. You don't mean that. You're just confused, scared, but you're safe now. I found you. Morrison took another step forward, apparently forgetting about Marcus's rifle. Come here, Sarah, come home with me. This is my home now, Sarah said firmly. With people who actually care about me. That was apparently the wrong thing to say. Morrison's face twisted with fury, and Marcus could see the exact moment when the man's self-control snapped. You think this broken-down soldier can protect you better than I can? Morrison snarled. You think he cares about you? He doesn't even know you. He saved my life, Sarah replied simply, without asking for anything in return. Without trying to control me or own me. That's what actual caring looks like. Morrison lunged forward, apparently forgetting about the rifle pointed at him and focusing only on getting to Sarah. Marcus had been expecting something like this. Men like Morrison couldn't handle losing control, and they often made desperate, stupid moves when cornered. Marcus could have shot him. Part of him wanted to, but instead, he took 2 quick steps forward and brought the butt of his rifle across Morrison's jaw in a perfectly executed strike that dropped the detective to his knees in the snow. Morrison swayed there for a moment, blood running from his mouth, then collapsed face first into the snow. He was breathing but unconscious. Is he dead? Sarah asked, her voice a mixture of hope and fear. No, just unconscious. He'll wake up in a few minutes with a hell of a headache. Marcus checked Morrison's pulse to be sure, then began searching through the man's pockets. He found the detective's service weapon, his badge, his wallet, and his cell phone. What are we going to do with him? Sarah asked. Marcus looked at the unconscious man in the snow, then at Sarah's frightened but hopeful face. Rex sat calmly beside her, as if he understood that his humans were in control of the situation now. We're going to make sure he can never hurt you again, Marcus said. But first we need to find out exactly what we're dealing with. How many people know he's here? Does he have backup coming? Is this an official investigation or his own personal vendetta? Marcus picked up Morrison's rifle and carried it back to the porch out of reach. Then he dragged the unconscious detective's body closer to the cabin, where he could keep an eye on him. Help me get him inside, Marcus said. When he wakes up, we're going to have a very detailed conversation about his future plans regarding you. As they struggled to move Morrison's dead weight, Sarah looked at Marcus with an expression of gratitude mixed with something else, something that looked like hope. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet, Marcus replied. This isn't over. Men like him don't give up easily. But I promise you one thing, Sarah. He's never going to hurt you again. Inside the warm cabin, Marcus zip-tied Morrison's hands behind his back using restraints from his military gear. The detective was still unconscious, but Marcus could see his breathing was steady and normal. He'd hit him hard enough to knock him out, but not hard enough to cause serious injury. Sarah sat in the chair by the fireplace, wrapped in blankets, watching nervously as Marcus secured their prisoner. Rex positioned himself between Sarah and Morrison, clearly understanding that the unconscious man represented a threat to someone he was now protecting. "What happens when he wakes up?" Sarah asked. "We get answers," Marcus replied grimly, "and we figure out how to make sure this ends permanently." Marcus began going through Morrison's belongings more carefully. The detective's wallet contained his badge, driver's license, and credit cards, but also something more interesting: business cards from a private investigator and what looked like contact information for several other law enforcement officers. Morrison's phone was locked, but Marcus had learned some things about technology during his military service. More importantly, he'd learned about people, and people often used predictable passwords. After a few attempts, he managed to unlock the phone using Sarah's birthday, a date that Morrison had apparently memorized. What Marcus found on the phone made his stomach turn. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." She looked up at him, fear creeping back into her eyes. "What is it?" "Morrison has been tracking more than just you. There are photos and information about at least 6 other women on this phone. Did you know about any of them?" Sarah's face went pale. "What do you mean?" Marcus turned the phone screen toward her, showing her a folder full of photographs. They were surveillance-style images of different women going about their daily lives, walking to their cars, entering buildings, sitting in restaurants. All of them appeared to be unaware they were being photographed. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. "He told me I was special, that he'd never felt this way about anyone before." "I think you were just the latest in a pattern," Marcus said gently. "Some of these photos date back over 2 years. Marcus continued scrolling through the phone and found something even more disturbing: detailed files on each woman, including their work schedules, home addresses, family members, and what appeared to be psychological profiles. Morrison had been studying these women like a predator studies prey. "There's more," Marcus said grimly. "Text messages between Morrison and other people. It looks like he's not working alone." Sarah leaned forward despite her fear, needing to understand the full scope of what she'd been dealing with. Marcus showed her several message threads where Morrison discussed surveillance techniques, shared information about the women he was tracking, and even made arrangements to borrow resources from other law enforcement agencies. "This is way bigger than just one obsessed ex-boyfriend," Marcus realized. "This looks like a network of people who are using their law enforcement positions to stalk and control women." A groan from the floor interrupted their conversation. Morrison was beginning to regain consciousness, his head moving slowly from side to side as he tried to orient himself. Marcus quickly put the phone away and moved to where he could watch Morrison closely. The detective's eyes opened gradually, unfocused at first, then sharpening as he remembered where he was. When he tried to move his arms and felt the restraints, his expression immediately turned to rage. "You son of a..." Morrison started to say, then stopped when he saw Marcus standing over him with his rifle. "Good morning, Detective," Marcus said calmly. "We need to have a talk." Morrison struggled against the zip ties for a moment, then seemed to realize it was useless. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life, soldier boy. When my department finds out what you've done, your department isn't going to find out anything," Marcus interrupted. "Because you're not here on official business, are you? This is personal." Morrison's eyes flicked towards Sarah, and Marcus could see the obsession flare up again. Even tied up and helpless, the man couldn't stop staring at her. "You checked out on personal time," Marcus continued, based on what he'd found in Morrison's phone records. "Told your supervisor you were taking a few days off to deal with family business. Nobody knows you came here. You don't know what you're talking about. I know you've been tracking at least 6 different women over the past 2 years. I know you have contacts helping you access law enforcement databases for personal use. I know you've been using police resources to stalk and terrorize people." Marcus held up Morrison's phone. "It's all right here." For the first time since waking up, Morrison looked genuinely worried. The phone contained evidence that could destroy his career and possibly send him to prison. "Sarah, I want you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell Detective Morrison," Marcus said, never taking his eyes off the bound man. "Because you need to understand what kind of person you've been dealing with." Marcus crouched down next to Morrison, close enough that only the detective could hear his next words clearly. "I've killed 17 people in combat," Marcus said quietly. "All of them were armed enemy combatants who were trying to kill me or my fellow soldiers. I took no pleasure in it, but I did what was necessary to protect innocent people. Morrison's face had gone pale, and Marcus could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the cabin. "You are not a soldier, detective. You're a predator who uses his badge to hurt defenseless people. If you ever come near Sarah again, if you ever contact any of the other women you've been stalking, if you ever use your position to abuse anyone else, you will discover that there are still people in this world who are willing to do what's necessary to protect the innocent." Marcus stood up and spoke loudly enough for Sarah to hear again. "Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me the names of everyone who has been helping you. You're going to tell me about every woman you've been tracking, and you're going to explain how we can make sure they're all safe from you and your friends." "I'm not telling you anything," Morrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, you are," Marcus replied calmly, "because the alternative is that I release copies of everything on your phone to the FBI, the state police, the media, and every law enforcement agency in Alaska. Your career will be over. Your friends will abandon you to save themselves, and you'll spend the next 10 to 15 years in prison." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Marcus could see the calculation in his eyes. The man was a coward at heart, and when faced with real consequences, he would choose self-preservation over loyalty. "What do you want to know?" Morrison asked finally. Over the next hour, Marcus extracted a detailed confession from Morrison. The detective revealed a network of corrupt law enforcement officers who traded information and resources to help each other track and control women. They used official databases to access personal information, coordinated surveillance activities, and even planted evidence when necessary to discredit women who tried to report them. Sarah listened in horrified silence as Morrison described how they had identified her as a target, studied her routines, and planned their approach. The detective had specifically chosen her because she was a nurse with a clean record and no criminal history, someone who would be believed if she reported abuse, which made breaking her down psychologically even more satisfying to him. "The others will come looking for me," Morrison said with false bravado. "When I don't check in—" "No, they won't," Marcus replied, showing him his own phone. "Because you're going to send them a message saying you lost Sarah's trail in the storm, and you're heading back to Fairbanks. You're going to tell them the lead was a dead end." Marcus forced Morrison to compose and send several text messages, essentially calling off any search efforts and reporting that Sarah had disappeared without a trace. The responses from Morrison's contacts showed they were disappointed but not surprised. Apparently losing track of their targets happened occasionally. "Now comes the important part," Marcus said, positioning himself directly in front of Morrison. "You and your friends are going to stop all contact with every woman you've been tracking. Sarah is going to disappear completely, and you're never going to look for her again. If any of those other women report any further harassment, if anything suspicious happens to any of them, if any member of your little network steps out of line, all of this information goes public." "You can't prove anything," Morrison said weakly. "I don't have to prove anything in court," Marcus replied. "I just have to create enough suspicion to destroy your careers and your reputations. How do you think your colleagues will react when they find out you've been using police resources for personal vendettas? How do you think the media will handle a story about corrupt cops stalking innocent women?" Morrison's defiance finally crumbled completely. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to disappear," Marcus said simply. "I want you to transfer to another state, preferably one far away from here. I want you to get psychological help for your obsession issues, and I want you to never ever contact Sarah or any of these other women again. And if I don't?" Marcus smiled, and there was nothing friendly about it. "Then Rex and I will pay you a visit, and it won't be as pleasant as this conversation has been." As if summoned by his name, Rex moved closer to Morrison and sat down, staring at the detective with calm, intelligent eyes. The message was clear. This dog would remember Morrison's scent, and he would be able to find him anywhere. Morrison looked between Marcus, Rex, and Sarah, and seemed to finally understand that his reign of terror was over. These people were not afraid of him, and they had the means to destroy him if he didn't comply with their demands. "I'll need time to arrange a transfer," he said quietly. "You have 2 weeks," Marcus replied. "After that, if you're still in Alaska, we'll assume you've decided not to cooperate." Marcus released Morrison just before dawn, after the storm had finally passed. The detective looked broken and defeated as he trudged through the snow toward where he'd left his truck, glancing back nervously several times as if expecting to be shot in the back. Rex watched him go with alert attention, memorizing every detail of the man's movement and scent. "Do you think he'll actually leave?" Sarah asked as they watched Morrison disappear into the early morning light. "He'll leave," Marcus said with certainty. "Men like him are bullies at heart. They only pick on people they think can't fight back. Now that he knows there are consequences for his actions, he'll find somewhere else to go." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing everything that had happened. What about the other women? The ones in his phone? Marcus had already thought about that. "We're going to help them too, but we have to be careful about how we do it. If we just dump all this information on the authorities, Morrison's friends might destroy evidence or retaliate against the victims." Over the next few days, Marcus and Sarah developed a careful plan. Using the information from Morrison's phone, they began reaching out anonymously to each of the women who had been targeted. Marcus used his military contacts to connect with FBI agents who specialized in corruption cases, carefully feeding them information without revealing their source. Sarah proved to have a talent for investigation that surprised Marcus. Her medical background had taught her to be detail-oriented and methodical, skills that translated well to building cases against Morrison's network. She also had an intuitive understanding of how the victims might be feeling and what kind of evidence would be most compelling. "I keep thinking about how isolated I felt," Sarah explained as they worked together at Marcus's kitchen table, surrounded by printouts and notes. "Morrison made me believe that I was crazy, that no one would believe me if I reported him. These other women probably feel the same way. They discovered that Morrison's network was even larger than they had initially realized. The detective had connections with corrupt officers in 3 different states, and they had been sharing information and resources for years. Some of the women had been tracked across state lines when they tried to relocate to escape their stalkers. This is bigger than we can handle alone," Marcus realized after they'd been working for a week. "We need help from people with more resources and authority than we have." That's when Sarah surprised him again. "I think I know someone who can help." She explained that during her nursing career she had worked with a social worker named Diana Martinez, who specialized in helping victims of domestic abuse. Diana had connections throughout the victim advocacy community and had worked with federal law enforcement on several high-profile cases. "She'll believe us," Sarah said with confidence, "and she'll know how to get this information to people who can do something about it." Marcus was initially hesitant to involve anyone else, but he recognized that Sarah was right. They had uncovered a criminal conspiracy that required a law enforcement response, and they needed allies who understood the system better than they did. Diana Martinez turned out to be exactly what they needed. She was a small, fierce woman in her 50s who had been fighting for victims' rights for over 20 years. When Sarah called her and explained the situation, Diana drove up from Anchorage immediately. "This is incredible work," Diana said as she reviewed their evidence. "And it's exactly the kind of thing that usually never gets exposed because the victims are too afraid to come forward." Diana had contacts in the FBI's Civil Rights Division who specialized in cases involving corruption under color of law, situations where law enforcement officers abused their authority to violate people's civil rights. She arranged for Marcus and Sarah to meet with a federal agent who could launch an official investigation. Special Agent Rebecca Chen, no relation to Sarah, was a serious woman who listened carefully to their story and reviewed their evidence with professional interest. She explained that the FBI had been seeing an increase in cases where law enforcement officers used their positions to stalk and harass people, but it was often difficult to prove because the victims were reluctant to report cops. "What you've uncovered here could help us shut down a network that's probably been operating for years," Agent Chen said. "But I need you to understand that this investigation could take months or even years to complete. Are you both prepared for that?" Marcus and Sarah looked at each other and nodded. They had come too far to back down now. Over the following weeks, the FBI investigation began to expand rapidly. Using the information Marcus and Sarah had provided, agents were able to identify additional victims and corrupt officers. Several of the women who had been stalked agreed to cooperate with the investigation once they learned they weren't alone. Morrison, true to his word, had transferred to a small police department in Nevada, but even there he was being watched. The FBI had alerted his new department about the investigation, and his supervisors were monitoring his activities closely. He's basically finished as a police officer, Agent Chen told them during one of their regular updates. Even if we can't prosecute him criminally, his law enforcement career is over. The other members of Morrison's network weren't as smart as he had been. Several of them continued their stalking activities, apparently believing they were safe. When the FBI arrested them, agents found additional evidence that led to even more arrests. As winter turned to spring in Alaska, Marcus and Sarah found themselves becoming closer than either of them had expected. What had started as a rescue had evolved into a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. "I never thanked you properly," Sarah said one evening as they sat on the porch of the cabin, watching Rex chase rabbits in the yard. "For what? For believing me. For not treating me like I was crazy or overreacting. For fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You did fight for yourself, Sarah. You ran 350 miles through a blizzard to get away from him. You survived exposure that should have killed you. You helped build the case that's going to put him and his friends away. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met." Sarah smiled, and Marcus realized it was the first completely relaxed, genuinely happy expression he'd seen on her face since the day he found her in the snow. "What happens now?" she asked. Marcus looked out at the Alaskan wilderness that had become his refuge and realized that he didn't need to hide anymore. Working with Sarah to expose Morrison's network had given him a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt since leaving the military. "I think we keep helping people," he said. "Diana has been talking about starting a non-profit organization to help victims of law enforcement abuse. She wants us to be involved." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Really? Really? Turns out there's a lot of people out there who need someone to believe their story and fight for them." Rex bounded up onto the porch and settled down between them, his tail wagging contentedly. The dog seemed to understand that his humans had found their mission in life. "I like the sound of that," Sarah said, reaching over to scratch Rex behind the ears. "We make a pretty good team." Marcus smiled and nodded. They did make a good team, a Marine, a nurse, and a very smart dog, helping people who had nowhere else to turn. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it felt right. "Don't forget Rex," Sarah added, looking at the German shepherd who was now sprawled contentedly under the conference table. "He's the one who found me in the first place." Marcus smiled as he looked around the room at the evidence of what they had built together. The news articles, the thank you letters, the photographs of people they had helped. It was more than he had ever dreamed of accomplishing. But more than that, he had found his family. Sarah had become not just his partner in the Foundation's work, but his closest friend and confidant. Diana was like the sister he'd never had, and Rex continued to be his loyal companion and emotional anchor. "What's next?" Diana asked as they finished packing up. "We keep growing," Sarah said. "There are still too many people out there who need help." Marcus nodded in agreement. "And we make sure that no one has to face what Sarah went through alone." As they walked out of the building together, Rex trotting happily beside them, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since that stormy night when he'd found a woman dying in the snow. He had come to Alaska seeking solitude and healing, but instead he had found purpose, family, and the chance to make a real difference in the world. Sometimes the most important moments in life happened when you least expected them. Sometimes helping someone else was the key to healing yourself, and sometimes a chance encounter during a blizzard could change everything. The Guardian Angel Foundation would continue to grow and help more people, but its roots would always trace back to that night when a Marine, his dog, and a desperate woman found each other in the Alaskan wilderness. It was proof that even in the darkest moments hope could survive, and that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they chose to stand up for what was right. "Don't forget Rex," Sarah added, looking at the German shepherd who was now sprawled contentedly under the conference table. "He's the one who found me in the first place." Marcus smiled as he looked around the room at the evidence of what they had built together. The news articles, the thank you letters, the photographs of people they had helped. It was more than he had ever dreamed of accomplishing. But more than that, he had found his family. Sarah had become not just his partner in the Foundation's work, but his closest friend and confidant. Diana was like the sister he'd never had, and Rex continued to be his loyal companion and emotional anchor. "What's next?" Diana asked as they finished packing up. "We keep growing," Sarah said. "There are still too many people out there who need help." Marcus nodded in agreement. "And we make sure that no one has to face what Sarah went through alone." As they walked out of the building together, Rex trotting happily beside them. Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since that stormy night, when he'd found a woman dying in the snow. He had come to Alaska seeking solitude and healing, but instead he had found purpose, family, and the chance to make a real difference in the world. Sometimes the most important moments in life happened when you least expected them. Sometimes helping someone else was the key to healing yourself, and sometimes a chance encounter during a blizzard could change everything. The Guardian Angel Foundation would continue to grow and help more people, but its roots would always trace back to that night when a Marine, his dog, and a desperate woman found each other in the Alaskan wilderness. It was proof that even in the darkest moments hope could survive, and that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they chose to stand up for what was right.